Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the merciful. It's a Tuesday evening, 26 minutes past 8. It's time for the Business Matters Show. The Business Matters Show brought to you by the Minara Chamber of Commerce. This evening, unfortunately, I'm alone in the studio. My dad not here with me. If you're listening out, big shout out to you, away on some business and doing something I wouldn't really like to be doing right now, so taking one for the team. This evening, we got a really interesting show lined up. Some doctor with us in the studio. Not doctor in the usual sense of the word, but a doctor in supply chain and business management. He's a business advisor, a coach, and specializes in small, medium enterprise development and knowledge transfers. It's Dr. Kenneth Moodley. Welcome to Radio Al Ansar.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Imran. Absolute pleasure being here, and a very good evening to you and your listeners.
Thank you. Thank you for being in studio this evening. As we all know, COVID cases on the rise, so not a time to get complacent and time to mask up and be very wary. So, yeah, thank you for taking time out of your Tuesday evening and coming in studio. Really appreciate it. This evening, we're talking business intelligence and what can your business do to become more intelligent. So the expert in the studio is Dr. Kenneth Moodley. Doctor, before we get started, tell us a little bit about yourself. What did you study? Where did you study? And how did you get to where you are currently are?
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So I studied industrial engineering, started back, and I'm going to give my age away a little bit, but started back in 1993 at the then ML Sultan Technikon.
Okay.
Basically studied industrial engineering all the way up through master's level, and then did a PhD via UKZN in the supply chain business world, and spent the last 25 years working in industry as a supply chain and business specialist, and basically worked across different facets of business. And about 4 to 5 years ago, decided for my sins that I want to go on my own, and basically decided to focus more on the SMME sector in terms of developing relationships and working with the guys to basically see how we could optimize their businesses across the different facets of it.
Fantastic. And after going on your own versus being in practice, how's it been?
Well, it has its pros and cons. And I think you mentioned that a lot of your listeners are also entrepreneurs.
Correct.
So I think most of them would probably resonate with the fact that you pretty much work 25 hours a day, right?
It never stops.
It never stops. You take a break when there's an opportunity to take a break. And when there's an opportunity to work, you work.
I know. My wife always tells me, even when we go on holiday, I'm not really there on holiday. But the life of an entrepreneur, right?
And you know what? It's the path we chose for whatever the reasons are, and hopefully they're good ones. So we must put all our energy into it and be positive to drive that path and journey forward.
Absolutely, and all the best in taking it forward and continuing on your path. Jumping into tonight's show, straight into it. As a business advisor focused within the SMME arena, what do you do?
I could probably explain that in an hour, but let me give it a shot. Let me give it a shot in 15 seconds. So essentially, what I do is I understand business and I understand systems. So I work with entrepreneurs to understand their business and their systems and what's working and what's not working. Okay, and then using the various tools and methodologies available in terms of industrial engineering, understanding where the waste is, and lean thinking, I then basically help them improve it. Okay, so in essence, I understand a system, I find out where the right leverage points are, and by tweaking those leverage points, we get the maximum benefit for the business.
Is there a specific industry that you're focused in?
No, actually. So early on in my career, I was heavily focused on FMCG. So various companies. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to mention them on air, so I'm just going to keep quiet.
Oh, we love success stories, but we'll get to that.
And since I've been on my own as a business advisor and consultant, I've basically done work for probably about 20 different organizations in the last 4 years, probably done just over 60 or 70 projects. And they range from retail stores to saw sharpening stores, to CMT factory type industries, transport, petroleum. So it's quite varied. And what I pride myself on is that I may not know a person's business technically, like an hardware store, for example. But what I do know is business. I do understand the system of how businesses work. And therefore, I focus on developing that working relationship with the business owner, because they've got the technical knowledge in their business, and I've got, let's call it, the business science aspects of it and understanding systems. And when you put that two together, then you can create value. And that's really what I focus on.
That's really quite an explanation. You broke it down very well in a few seconds. Tell us, how different is business intelligence to what they would usually call management consulting?
Okay. So management consulting, and again, both terms are very broad. Yeah. And I know we've got limited time on the show, so we're not going to go into the detail. But at a top level, management consulting is broad, and one aspect could be understanding the business intelligence aspect, because management consulting incorporates a number of areas, from processes to people, management accounts, as well as the data aspects of business. Business intelligence very specifically focuses on how do you as a businessman or businesswoman use the data that you have available to enable you to make more data-driven scientific decisions, so that it's a more informed decision and not one necessarily based on gut feel and emotion.
Okay.
And at a high level, that's the difference. Now, the reality is, when it comes to business intelligence and using data, depending on the size of your business, I don't want people to think this is a highly technological area. Yes, there's technology you can use, but you can also do data analytics on Excel. You can do it on a piece of paper. So the level of technology you go is one aspect, but actually using data to drive business intelligent decisions is another aspect. So one is a mindset and the other one is a tool.
Understood. And you mentioned data quite a few times there, and we all know big data is at the forefront of business philosophy at the moment. How do you rate big data as part of business intelligence? Is it something that you focus on quite heavily or not so much?
Yes and no.
Okay.
So let me quantify that statement. So yes, in the sense that if you've got a more medium-sized organization, which is pretty large, which got lots of moving parts and therefore lots of data, then obviously you focus on big data analytics, you focus on data mining, and there's various tools, etc., to do that. And that enables you to make certain decisions. But let's assume you are a small business, maybe 2 or 3 people, you're running a very small store somewhere and you're selling 10 items. You don't need to go to that nth degree of data analytics to enable you to do proper business management decisions. Okay? So, and that's the no part, because it's really about customizing the solution and the approach to that particular industry or business. My personal view is, if any person tells you they've got a template that you can take because they've successfully implemented it at 5 different industries, and they'll bring it to your business and successfully implement it, it's almost a plug and play, I'd be very wary of that individual. Problems might be the same, but environments are very different. There's no 2 supermarkets, for example, that's the same. You might have the same problem of excess inventory, but what led to the excess inventory will be very different because of the environment and people capability, etc. So you cannot necessarily then use the same approach. It's really about customizing the approach to the problem within that particular environment.
Okay, so it's all relative to the size of the business and the people using the technology or the tools provided.
Absolutely.
Why take a business intelligence approach? Why bother? I mean, the business is functioning, it's not broken. The old Indian adage goes, don't fix it if it's not broken.
Yeah.
So why take a business intelligence approach?
So there's probably a couple of reasons. But before I get into the reasons, there's one thing I want to say, and I hope I'm not, hope I don't offend anyone by saying this. But the reality is that generally family-owned businesses started 20, 30 years ago, maybe even longer. And the individual that started it off with maybe 2 or 3 people in the business. Maybe they were selling 5 different items, and they had a black book, and they were able to manage it. Even in their head, they could manage it. And over the generations and over the years, they've grown that business. And that business maybe is now 100 million rand plus. Maybe it's moved to employ 110 people. Maybe it's no more selling 5 products, it's selling 155 products or even more. Okay? The problem, however, is sometimes individuals are still managing that business with the same black book. So the question is, has your people and processes and systems kept pace with business growth? Right? That's the first sort of foundation I want to lay for my answer. The second one is times have changed. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, maybe there was not so much competition in the markets. So therefore your inefficiencies were almost hidden and they didn't bite you as badly. These
Correct.
days, notwithstanding COVID and the poor state of our economy, business is tough. So you cannot afford to throw money away. You cannot afford to make decisions and then say, I'm going to make this decision on gut feel and let me see what happens. But I've invested 100,000 or 1 million rand in whatever the investment is. Let's say buying a new piece of production equipment. So the reason people should bother is because you cannot throw good money after bad. Right? As an individual, you've worked hard for this money. You cannot make decisions purely on gut feel. Okay? What business intelligence does, and taking that data-driven approach, is it removes the emotion, okay, to a large extent. You do the analytics, you see the picture that it presents in front of you, and you make the best possible decision to ensure you get the best possible return on investment. Right? And that is why people should bother.
Okay, and that's where you step in to help them with those business decisions.
Correct.
So, jumping off topic a little bit, let's talk a little bit about what you would do in a business setting. So, talk us through a bit of the processes or procedures that you would go through from your side when walking into a new business and offering your services.
Okay. So, let's assume that doesn't matter what business. So, I walk in, the owner is taking me around, let's assume their warehouse. Some of the things you look for is the telltale signs of where you are bleeding money. Maybe it's excessive inventory. Maybe it's people that's looking underutilized, whatever the case might be. Now, I must say, Imran, there's 2 sort of scenarios that plays out here. The one scenario is where the business owner calls me and says, Kenneth, I actually know what the problem is. Can you come look here? And in some, they tell me, all we know is that we are losing money. Our sales revenue looks good, but our bottom line profits don't look so good. So somewhere in between, something's going wrong, but we don't know. Come and have a look. Now, 2 very different approaches, okay?
Correct.
But if I take the second one, which is around top line looks good, bottom line profits looks bad, we're losing money somewhere in between. What I typically do there is I first go in and do an assessment of the business. We look at the financials, we do a loss and waste as well to understand where is it that we are losing money. And what we basically do, we actually become like investigators, where we peel back the layers, so slowly uncover where are we losing money, and then we start asking the whys to identify root cause. And then we say, okay, now how do we fix?
Sometimes that's good for, to be looked at from an outside set of eyes. Someone who's involved in the business and, very deep in the detail sometimes overlook some of these things.
Absolutely. I mean, just to give you an example, I did work for one particular business, and their inventory was sitting at about 85 million. And by understanding the reasons and looking at their procurement processes, we actually reduced it by about 35. And that's
extra cash flow.
That's extra cash flow. And like you said, the guys within the business didn't even realize the impact of their actions. And
just-in-time ordering and things like that.
Correct. And this is where knowledge transfer and capability building plays a critical role. I always say that every individual in your organization has to wear 2 caps on. The one cap is the technical cap, which is, this is my job, I do sales, or I'm in the warehouse, etc. And technically they must be good at that job. And they must understand how their job impacts the business.
All right.
The second cap is they must have a business cap on.
Okay.
Which basically says, any action that I take as an individual on the shop floor or the factory floor, what impact does it have on the business? Because often people work in isolation. And this is where data is important, right? That we understand what's happening through this business. Because I could make a decision and it helps me in my warehouse, for example, but actually it has a negative effect. In the example I gave you, the guy made a decision, let's say, to buy excessive stock because he was getting a good deal on it, a quantity discount. Yeah. But now he sits with 10 months worth of stock. And
that's where his profit is sitting.
And that's where his profit is sitting.
In the stock.
In the stock.
And generally, a lot of the times, that stock has to be sold at a discount in order to cash up.
Correct. Yeah.
There's been many examples. I know many people I've chatted to, they, especially here in this, call it local Durban market, they're not too enthusiastic about a consultant walking into their business and, in inverted commas, I actually have my hand up now going, teaching me about my business. I know my business. I've been running this thing successfully for 30 years. What is a consultant going to walk in and tell me that I don't already know? So for people out there that have possibly been burnt before by consultants, what are things to look out for? What jargon should they be on the wary for? Just some heads up.
Okay, so I think the adage of if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Yeah.
And the second one is there's no such thing as a free lunch, right?
Okay.
There's also a third one that says if you buy cheap, buy twice. Okay, especially if it's from China. So I agree with you. Consultants do have a bad rap, and sometimes it's justified because the reality is there is a lot of individuals out there. And there's a lot of people who, if they got a laptop and a cell phone, they print a business card and call themselves a consultant. So as a business owner, you also have to be wary of who it is you want to engage with. Do your background checks. Have a discussion with the person, sort of evaluate whether he or she knows what they're talking about in context of what you're telling them. And if you get a level of comfort, then you can go forward. Like I said, references is important. I pride myself the last 3 to 4 years of being on my own. Pretty much 95% of my work has come via references.
Okay.
And that's really about the service and the quality that you expect from consultants. And I'm going to repeat again. Check the references. The reality is consultants, etc., is a closed circle as well. So therefore, people can give references and you can evaluate their reputation before you engage. Because the reality is, a lot of times business people, we also want to focus on sales. And we sort of say, do we really need to spend on this consultant? Because it's hard.
Grudge spend.
It's a grudge spend. It's hard to quantify the return on investment. And these are some of the questions you can ask the consultant. Say, give me examples. So what can I expect from you? Because a lot of consultants, and I'm really not in favor of this, there's a type of consultant who gives you a report that you keep on the top right-hand side of your table. And when you do spring cleaning, you get rid of it. Other than that, it's added no value.
Okay.
So you really have to ask yourself and the consultant is practically, what are you going to do for me?
Objectively, what are the outcomes?
What are the outcomes? What are you going to do? And if the person cannot answer, then I suggest you show him or her the door and get someone who can.
So what are the reasons that consultants might have failed in a business? And then moving on from the failures, what are some of the objective measures that a company can look for from a consultant?
So there's probably, at a high level, there's 2 reasons that a consultant would fail. The first one is internal to them, which is they actually don't have the skill set in terms of what they are doing, and therefore they're sort of winging it, for lack of a better word, and they mess it up. Okay?
And get paid in the process.
And get paid for it, and they move on. And you left less X amount of money and no better off than before they came.
Possibly even worse off with a new system that no one knows how to use.
Absolutely. The second one is sometimes the problem sits inside the organization. And the reality is, a lot of change. I've seen bad projects do well because the people bought into it. And I've seen good projects fail because people have not bought into it. So it's really then about not just the consultant, because the reality is, remember, it's your business. I've got no authority over any of your stuff. So if the business owner that sanctioned the consultant to come in doesn't walk around and act like he really believes in what needs to be implemented, then guess what? Everybody underneath is not going to either. So the change and project management aspect of it is critical.
Okay.
You have to get buy-in at all levels. I've actually, if someone's, call it, commissioned my services grudgingly, I'd rather say no to the project than accept it, because then I'm also setting myself up for failure. And remember, when it fails, the individual is not going to say, I didn't do something. They're going to say the consultant came in, promised the world, and it didn't work.
True.
Right? The example I often use is, I can design a car for you, but if you park the car in the garage and don't turn the key, the car's going to fail because it's not providing the value you thought it would. So the step is that the workers, the employees, etc., get developed, have the buy-in, the skills, the capability to actually go and use this tool. Because like you said, it might be a fancy system and not being used.
So Kenneth, do you work alone or do you have a team?
No, so I actually have a team, but more than that, I have a network.
Okay.
So, one of my good colleagues, Ahmed Sidat, for example, we work quite closely together. And what we do is we customize not just the solution, but the team based on what we need. So if someone's calling me in and we're looking at the end-to-end business and the problem is sitting in the warehouse, then there's a particular skill set that's needed. If we need financial involvement because we're doing a business plan because that particular organization wants to go look for funding to expand the business, then there's a particular skill set. So with that cross-functional team that we have available to us, we basically customize the approach and customize the team. And at the end of the day, it's about how do we give the customer or the client the best return on investment possible.
So speaking of giving the clients the best, within the SMME arena at the moment, can you tell us of some of the hot topics that the hip and happening companies are implementing at the moment to make their businesses more efficient?
Okay. So firstly, the big thing is about cash flow, right?
Right.
COVID-19 has taught us, if anything, that you got to manage your cash flow. That circumstances out of your control can result in customers not coming in, or you're not getting materials in because borders are closed, etc. So cash flow to enable survivability is critical.
Okay.
And with that as well is risk management and business continuity planning as well. That's come in as well. And that's the key topic. But I just want to go back to cash flow for a little bit. And with cash flow, inherent in every business is waste. Okay, and waste means it's having a negative impact on obviously cash flow and profitability, etc. And what companies are now focusing on is something called lean, which is lean thinking. It's certainly not new. It's been around for a long time. Different companies are at different levels of maturity and thinking in terms of whether they're actually applying it or not.
Okay.
But lean thinking is really about saying, there's a lot of detail there, but if I'm just going to go high level, lean thinking really says, do you as a business owner understand who your customer is? Do you understand what your customer perceives as value? Right? It could be cost, it could be quality, it could be customer service, it could be a returns policy, whatever the case is. Do you understand that? And then there's tools and methodologies, obviously, to help you understand that. Then you go a step further and you say, what is your value chain? In other words, your series of activities that enables you to deliver the service or product to your consumer. And when you understand that, you then go through the entire process and you see where are the points where there's wasteful activities. Now, if you'll indulge me on this,
sure.
A lot of times people see waste as I produce a product, and if there's spillage on the floor, it's waste because it's a quality defect. Spot on, that's correct. But within lean, there's lots of other types of waste that gets spoken about, like excess inventory is a waste. Overproduction is a waste. Transportation, necessary evil, but still a wasteful activity, right? So what lean thinking forces one to do is to understand that value chain, understand where the wasteful activities are, and then systematically go through your process and see how do I eradicate it. Now, if you do that, then obviously you're going to improve your top line and bottom line. Okay. Now, it's obviously a process. It's not a quick fix either. Sometimes it is. If it's small, manageable projects, sometimes it's a little bit longer. But it's a journey. that you have to take, because it's also changing the mindset of all your employees and the capability of your employees to go through this process and to continuously drive optimization till it becomes a positive cycle. Now, that's the first aspect. Now, the second one is, or that approach, should I say, can be done on a piece of paper, it can be done on Excel, or you can go get fancy ERP software systems, etc., that will help you do all of these things. Obviously, depending on the complexity within your business and the affordability, you then go choose the right tool to enable you to implement the methodology. You mentioned earlier things like fourth industrial revolution and those types of things, and big data analytics. So, again, you need sophisticated AI software to do some of those things, right?
Which is costly.
But there's also simpler programs that can be developed. And I've been working with a few developers.
Some examples?
So, if you take ERP software, you can go fancy, SAP, SysPro, and those types of things. Or you can get developers that can actually develop a more homegrown solution specifically for an SMME. And, the cost is drastically less, but it becomes a customized solution. The watch out here, though, is don't just please rush out and go get a developer, because the developer doesn't understand the process in your business.
You have to tell him what to do.
Yes, they know how to write code.
Yeah.
And where a good business advisor comes in is being able to match the operational requirements of your business in the language of the developer and the developer's language in your language, and make sure both meet so that you get a blueprint that works, not a system that looks like a black box and nobody knows what to do with it.
100%.
So these are the types of things that one would look at.
Awesome. We're almost out of time, but I think we have time for a bit more. So can you, without giving away too much, I'm not sure what your confidentiality clauses are like, but what are some of the success stories and systems or processes that you've been successful in since going out on your own?
Okay. So, I mentioned the one with the inventory reduction of 35 out of, let's call it 85, 90 million.
Right.
There was one particular
big win
company.
there.
Yeah, absolutely. I was quite proud of that. There's a SMME that I started doing work for in November last year. And regular coaching, we looked at specific projects, etc. And in April this year, or was it May, the guy phoned me and said, listen, I'm surviving because of you.
Okay.
Because what we had done is, we had followed the same approach I mentioned. We'd basically cut out waste. And like you said earlier, some people they're in their business so they don't see it. So you can't see the wood from the trees. Whereas when someone comes in from outside with the right mindset, the right skill set, they know what to look for. So we actually reduced this person's expense line items by about 8%.
Okay.
Right? And that went straight to the bottom line. They'd obviously banked that from, I think it was, say, January onwards for about 3 or 4 months. And by the time COVID started really biting, they were in a much better financial position that enabled them. It's still tough, don't get me wrong, but they could keep their nose a little bit above water. Yeah. The next one I want to talk about is actually a digital printing company that I did work for. And basically across about 12 months, we actually implemented various systems to the point where they got South African Bureau of Standards accreditation for safety signage. They also got the ISO 9001 quality accreditation, which actually enabled them to engage with the likes of Toyota and things like that to look at work and those types of things. And that's as an SMME employing 50, 55 people. COVID obviously came in through a curveball at everybody.
True.
But yeah, those were some of the good stories. There's obviously a lot more. But like you said, I think time's a bit of a factor as well.
Speaking of COVID, we mentioned that people's cash flows are strained, which means, you got to prioritize your spend. So what sort of price points would a business expect to pay for a consultant or business intelligence officer, call it, just to give people an idea of, if they were contemplating upgrading a system or hiring a consultant to improve business, what should one be paying?
So there's actually a range, right, based on a person's experience and what they come with, and that, to be honest with you, that range could vary anywhere from 400 to 500 rand an hour, all the way to about 2,500 to 3,000 rands an hour, depending where you go. My recommendation to the listeners is engage with the business advisor, understand what their costs are. Often, and if I take my approach, I'm quite happy to engage with individuals because, like you said, cash flow is a problem. And as a business advisor, if I can't understand that, I don't think anybody else will. So my recommendation is engage with your business advisor, understand what the rates are, understand what the value is, but also negotiate with the individual. Now, you don't have to negotiate necessarily on, listen, cut down the rate because you're worried that the guy or girl is going to give you a half-baked job, and not full value. But you certainly can negotiate, for example, to say, listen, I know your rate is X, let's call it 1,000 rands an hour. However, cash flow is a bit tight. Are you prepared to do it at risk? So in other words, I'll pay you what your cost is. Hypothetically, let's make it 500 rand an hour. And based on the successful implementation, when we see the value hitting the bottom line, then yes, let's talk about a profit share or something of that nature. So there's various ways to skin the cat, right?
Okay.
And my advice to the listeners is engage with the business advisor on these options. In fact, that's also a test of how much faith the business advisor have in their own ability to deliver something, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure there'll be some conditions around it, but you know what? Generally, for me, it's about communication. If two individuals can sit around the table and have a proper discussion about what the limitations are on both sides, what the expectations are, they can come to some sort of mutual agreement that's beneficial on both sides.
Fantastic. Kenneth, if any of the listeners want to get in touch, what does your business go as and how can they contact you?
Okay, so the business name is Nikshan Consulting.
Okay.
They can contact me on my cell phone, which is 083 6465 408.
Just you want to repeat that?
Sure. So the number again is 083 6465 408. Alternatively, you can pop me an email on Nikshan. Sorry, let me rephrase that. Kenneth, KENNETH, at Nikshan.com.
How do you spell Nikshan?
So Nikshan is NIKSHEN. So that's Kenneth at Nikshan.com.
Okay, awesome. Interesting name. You just quickly tell us where it came from.
Yeah, my two daughters, my eldest daughter is Nikela and my youngest daughter is Shanae. And basically it's the first few letters of both fused together, and I came up with Nikshan.
Touching.
And that's what I go with.
Yeah. Kenneth, thanks for being in studio this evening, and thanks for giving up your Tuesday evening to pass on some knowledge to our listeners. I surely hope you've piqued the curiosity of some of the business people out there. In this trying time, businesses are always looking to generate more income and always looking to cut expenditure. If you marry the two, then your financial statements should look a whole lot better. And there's no better way to achieve that than getting a pair of outside eyes, trusted outside eyes, to have a look at your business and see where efficiency can be implemented. And from that perspective, I think a business intelligence officer is the go-to option.
Absolutely. And Imran, from my side, thank you very much for the invite. Really enjoyed being here and talking to you and sharing some of the knowledge and information with the listeners. Certainly hope it was value add. And yeah, if the guys want to contact me, my details are there. Appreciate any feedback as well. Always nice to get feedback and get better at what we do. And yeah, to your listeners, stay safe and yeah, just be positive and keep your head facing the sun and keep plugging away.
Awesome. Absolute pleasure having Kenneth in studio this evening. We went very broad this evening, but surely in the future we would definitely like to have Kenneth back to talk in more detail about a few processes and procedures or new technologies out there on the market. But that's it for this evening from the Business Matters team. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.